For me, Kung Fu Panda 2 is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. I go back to it all the time, and I just like it's on the background, just playing all the time. There's just something about the redemptiveness, and it just speaks to my story, to my life. I'm like, man.
My kids are teenagers now, but when they were younger, we were always on the lookout for good books that would teach them about God and the biblical story. But it seemed that many of these books carried a tension between capturing narrative elements of biblical stories and explaining the themes and truths underlying those stories. So, for instance, Samson becomes a hero empowered by God rather than the desperately conflicted person bent towards violence that he was, but instilling honest, theologically sound biblical truths in the hearts and minds of our children is both an investment in their future connection with God and in the witness of the church as they grow into adulthood. I'm Kenny Innes, and on this episode of TheoDisc, I'm talking with Sarah Shin and Shin Maeng about their new children's book, The Deliverer Has Come, an Advent story that takes the fulfilment of Israel's story in Jesus' birth seriously while communicating effectively to children. Dr. Sarah Shin and Shin Maeng are Korean Americans who live in Aberdeen in Scotland. Sarah teaches charismatic evangelism and church planting at WTC and was recently awarded her PhD in systematic theology from the University of Aberdeen, where she researched the connection between atonement and ethics. She's also the author of Beyond Colourblind, as well as The Deliverer Has Come. Shin is an artist and illustrator who holds an MA in urban leadership from Gordon Conwell. He loves music, stories, Marvel comics, and creating, and has a passion for justice and seeing God move. And you can find out more about Shin's artwork at shinhappen.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, I am delighted to have Sarah Shin and Shin Maeng on the TheoDisc podcast. Thank you guys for being our guest today.
Oh yeah,
We're
so happy to be here, and it's like you're like our homie, man. This is great.
Well, what we should just divulge at the beginning is that Sarah and Shin are in Aberdeen, so not too far from where I am, and we're both in vineyard circles, and so we know each other a bit, and so it's just glad to speak to you guys anyway, but even more glad to speak to you about this new book that you guys have produced together. I've got a copy right here. The Deliverer Has Come. It's wonderful. You're looking at all these beautiful illustrations that are on the inside that Shin has done, and the text by Sarah. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But before we get to the book, you have to run the gauntlet of 3 questions that we ask all of our first-time guests on the podcasts. We are going to talk about what's new for you. So we want to hear a little bit about what's constant for you and what are things that you return to in your life. So the 3 categories: a book or a film you return to, a food you return to, and a location that you return to. So let's go first with a book or a film. I'm going to throw it to Sarah first. What have you got?
Well, so I just finished my PhD, and before studying, I worked with adults, right, with young adults, and talking about evangelism in a university context. So I veer towards more like kids fiction, like fantasy, in terms of C.S. Lewis, right, and Narnia, or there's a guy named George MacDonald, and Madeline L'Engle calls him the father of Tolkien, Lewis, and herself, father of us all.
Yep.
He has The Princess and the Goblin, Princess and Curdie. I really like that second one because it's really beautiful and super creative. I like that it takes me out of just prose and nonfiction, and it's a different way for me to just kind of be immersed in a book. Yeah.
Awesome. Shin, what about you?
Can I give it 2 movies?
Okay. Because it's you.
Yeah. It's for me, Kung Fu Panda 2 is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. I go back to it all the time, and I just it's on the background, just playing all the time. There's just something about the redemptiveness, and it just speaks to my story, to my life. I'm like, man. The other and it's like this is something. It's like it's a comfort food almost. It's like not a comfort food, but like a comfort film. It's a
Yep.
documentary called Sound City, and it's literally about this recording studio in California, and it's the history of like all these like great. It's such a nerdy thing, but like I'm
Yeah.
also a sound tech for my church, and I'm like, oh man, this is great. And it's like from like Nirvana to like all these other like really amazing bands. Fleetwood Mac was one of the earliest signings for this studio, and so it's this weird thing that I just like watching, and it just feels like I just feel at home and energized. So I don't know. That's it.
Yeah, I love those kind of things as well. There's one on Muscle Shoals that they have, the other studio, and I remember, was it last Christmas or the Christmas before, I watched the full 9 hours of the Beatles Get Back, of just them like in the studio recording their album. I was just like, oh, this
Wow.
is heaven. So I'm with you on the Muso documentary, definitely. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, what about a food that you return to or a meal?
I think it really depends where we live because we usually like to eat things that are like really good, like local, that you can go to. Around here, there's some really fantastic Turkish food that we
Wow.
just, yeah, that's like our splurge treat, on a Sunday. Um, yeah, there's a couple places, but like I am absolutely sure we're gonna have Turkish food in heaven. It just hits the spot. All the different notes on your tongue, the umami, it's fantastic. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say the Aberdeen buttery.
Oh yes, that too.
Yeah, I
Sure.
mean it's good.
You can't eat it. He can't eat gluten.
I
He
know,
can't eat bread.
but I can smell it.
And you can smell it and
Oh
then
man,
cry in a corner.
I cry in a corner because I'm like, it smells so good. I can't have gluten, so that's unfortunate. But I think for me in this season, the thing that I come back to is actually my I love making my Korean double fried chicken, and I go back to it and I eat it all the time, and it's super crispy,
Mhm.
and I'm always so happy.
You're making Kenny upset because you haven't given
No,
him.
no, it's because before we hit record, I said I know what Shin's going to say, and I said I should write it down, and I didn't write it down, but I was going to put Korean fried chicken. So
Oh yeah, nice.
yeah, I hear you. Yeah, we
He does know
definitely
me.
need to make me that. What about a location or a place that you keep coming back to?
I think if I have like just a really difficult week or month and I want to like reset, I love going to this beach near here. It's Nubra Beach, and it's like
Mm.
there's this all. It's like super wild. It's like it's not super wild, but wild enough that you're like there's wildlife everywhere. On one side of the river is like a whole pod of seals. There's like maybe 100 to 120 seals, and they're on the other side, so it's not like they're right there and you have to like defend yourself from seals or anything. It's just like they're kind of chilling over there. I'm chilling over here, and it's usually there's not that many people. I just love it there. I just feel the Lord there, and
Mm.
just I forget about technology, social media, and I'm just looking at these seals just relaxing or swimming or playing or following me, and the birds trying to catch fish in the water. It's just I just get really reconnected to the world, and so yeah, that's probably one of my favorite places.
That's great. For you, Sarah?
I love the Scottish beaches. Like when we lived in St. Andrews, loved being able to just like walk to a beach in 10 minutes. I love the beaches around here in Aberdeen. Yeah, I think we share a love of beaches. We're like anytime it's sunny and not too windy, we're headed for the water.
Even if it's windy.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes we're the only ones there. Like it's still not as cold as Boston, so we're good.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you, guys. That's good. I feel like we know you a little bit now, and our listeners kind of hearing some of the stuff that you're interested in. You said right there, Sarah, you just have not long finished your PhD, and Shin, you have been an artist and an illustrator for some time and really developed and honed your own personal style. It's wonderful. I encourage people to go check out shinhappens.com to go and see Shin's work on there. But you would expect then that maybe the next thing that would come out after a PhD would be a big theological, weighty Tomb, a big massive book, or Shin's doing all these amazing like prints and artworks that he produces. But what led you guys to think, okay, what we're going to do is make a children's book together?
Well, first, just disclaimer: the timing is that anytime a book comes out, especially a kid's book, it's been in the planning for at least a year or a year and a half. Yeah, this one probably like
2 years.
At least 2 years. So it just happened that everything aligned with the PhD.
Yep.
Finishing, and yes, I eventually have to think about tomes and lots of pages with no pictures. But I think for some context is for us to come here and to study. Shin basically put his career mostly on pause. He was doing some drawing, and but he was really helping take care of our daughter, who's now 6. We've been in Scotland for 5 years, and so until she was able to go to nursery and school, he didn't have a lot of time. And as he was picking things back up, and I'm grateful for that sacrifice he made so that we could study, that I could study, and we can make our life here. He kind of one day just said, if I could draw children's books for the rest of my life, like I would be so happy. And for me, I'm like, my husband has sacrificed so much, and he's just starting to try to pick up his career, and I was writing my thesis, but that just lit a fire under me. I'm like, my beloved has loved me well, and I'm going to try to love him well. So we're going to find an agent, and that agent is going to help us find, a publisher. And so that it just kind of all was happening as, the thesis was, as I was facing the final year. But I think we just really believe in each other's callings and work. So that's kind of where it started. And then things schedule-wise just ended up so that like I finished my thesis and it was like, surprise, here's the book, go peddle it, go spread the word. So I'm still a wee bit tired from all that happening at once.
That's basically like it just felt like we're just like, here, we finished the marathon, here, run another marathon or a 10K, or like but it's good.
Well, why was Advent? Why did that become the theme that you guys worked on?
I think what's cooler than like angels and just like I think it's like a great origin story too. It's like it's a great way to start a children's book. I mean, I guess you could start in other places, but like I feel like it's kind of a great way to like introduce people to faith. I mean, it's like, and I always feel like it's people gravitate towards my art even if they're not Christian. So I remember like even early on in my just art career, like I would walk into a store and I would have like my phone case would have my art on it or something, and people would be like, what is that? And I would have like this lengthy conversation about like Jesus. And they'll be like, oh, I've been really wanting to reconnect with my faith or this and that. Or they're like, I'll just have this like amazing conversation. So I think the story of Jesus' birth is just a great way to start. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we wanted a book that both Christians could read and also that non-Christians, people that have very little familiarity with the story that Christians live in, they could read and feel compelled to. I knew his art's capable of doing that because when I worked for university, Shin was often contracted to do some really cool projects. So I've time tested, reactions to his art all across the United States. So I think we're just thinking, oh man, but this could be a really cool way to like equip the church and just to get an old story told in a new way, faithfully. So it just kind of, we just were like, what about this? And they're like, it's one of those brainstorming sessions that just kind of, you're not sure if it's going to land anywhere and then land somewhere, and then we rolled with it.
Also, I think that you had this story kind of in your back pocket for quite a bit too.
I don't really remember.
I don't remember.
Mushy after.
It's been a
PhD.
But I do remember, like, I think that there was like maybe we'll take this particular character, like, because we're taking it from a different route.
So we basically introduce a fictional character into the story. So in Luke 2, there's a prophetess named Anna, and she meets Jesus and his family when he's gone to the temple after he's been born. And so we're like, oh, what if we made up a grandniece to her named Annika, and kind of what if she hears about the idea of, instead of saying Messiah, because not a lot of non-Christians really know what that means, say deliverer, and hearing the idea of a deliverer coming.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly when that, I think it came as we were just dreaming.
Yeah.
I don't exactly remember where. I was just like, okay, well, how do you tell this story in a fresh new way, trying to keep to a lot of the historical details, but opening up imagination.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting viewpoint. There's the viewpoint from a little girl who's kind of observing and eager to be a part of the story, which I loved that. So it's a great viewpoint for people who, from looking at the birth narrative to entering into some kind of participation in it, owning the story for themselves, which I really love that viewpoint. And I was wondering, you've already mentioned you guys have a little girl. How much of a part did she play, considering her and kind of the germination of the story?
Oh man, for me, I was just like, oh yeah, I want her to have a fringe just like my daughter. I want her to and literally as I was creating the pieces, she was like, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess so. And also my kid, she goes to a very multi-ethnic school. There's every country accounted for almost, but it's there's not a lot of East Asian kids. And so at the time when I was creating it, really wanted to draw her a book that she could relate to. It was more almost this is for you, my daughter, right? I want you to feel like there's something out there for you. And so yeah, I think I intentionally drew the main character like my daughter.
Even though I think the other characters that are the human figures, try to draw them more kind of historically accurate to the ethnic context. The angels are just every background possible because they're angels, right? They're not human.
Yeah.
People try to depict them, in their own. Yeah, I think we wanted a story we could read to her, and a story she could see herself in.
Yeah,
and that her friends could also hear and imagine themselves. So that was kind of part of the hope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dig a little bit into kind of the story. We won't give the whole thing away because we want people to actually read it. But I think what else was interesting to me was when you go to the biblical text and you read the gospel narratives, they're quite intent in letting you know that this is the continuation of a story that's already in motion. And even the title of your book hints at that, right? The deliverer has come. Even in the title is a sense of anticipation. So how did you guys try to retain that sense of story in motion?
Overall, we were just thinking that we really want kids, readers, to understand that this coming of God in the person of Jesus, that is part of this longer story that reaches all the way back to Israel's history. Sometimes in the name of trying to make things simple for kids, we take things out, and I think we really didn't want to do that. We also oral storytelling and talking about the Bible through story, through hearing other people talk about it. That was a way that ancient Israel's consciousness was formed. Oral storytelling was really huge. So we wanted to depict that. We wanted to depict that special relationship between elders and children, and storytelling that continues. So I think we're just we don't want to tell the Christmas story. It's just there was a silent night and there were angels and a baby came. What's that? That's there's more there. And and so we wanted to tell a particular piece of a larger story, in the hopes that that story and what Shin draws makes kids want to learn about the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of the hope, that we don't just section it off into a neat package. We're resisting just neat, okay, this is all you need. I'm no, here's the entry point and here's more that you can learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to me Sarah, the prophetic texts from the Old Testament are laced throughout the actual narrative as well. So there's continually these callbacks, right, that are in the text that you've written.
Yeah. I think we were just how do we depict this? We'd be Shin, this Isaiah anticipation of the Messiah or the deliverer. How would you draw this? It was all that. It's as the main character, as her great aunt Anna is telling her about who is expected to come, the promised one. She's referring back to the prophets. And I think a lot of the Gospels do that. They're like, just as promised, like in the scriptures, this is what's happening. So we wanted to kind of depict that in a storytelling form because we just feel like that's faithful to scripture. And it captures that dynamic, again, that it's not a Jesus that comes divorced from the Old Testament, that the Bible as a whole is shaping our understanding of how we live in God's story.
Yeah. Oh, the thing that I was thinking about was like, also the way I draw is like I love putting little Easter eggs into things, and like it would be so plain and so like not fun if I just did like the normal, just the boxed off story of just Christmas, right? But if you could add in like, I mean, some of them, like one of my favorite stories is like the golden calf, because it's just like it's such a weird story, but also at the same time it's like it's going to get a kid to be like, well, what is the golden calf? Like, what is this thing? And they'll like look it up, or they'll like Google it or whatever, I don't know, right? And they'll read like about like Moses telling them like, you have to like destroy this thing because like, yeah, and you like destroy your idols and eat it, right? You have to consume this thing. And you're like, whoa, like what? This is like this is different, right? This is, and for me, it's so much more fun to add those little stories in that, because that's like all those little stories or those big stories in the Jewish history accumulates towards Jesus. It points always to Jesus, which is what I want to do.
Yeah, be unexpected to find the golden calf in your regular Advent book, but there
Right,
it is.
right.
And I think as well, Shin, you're obviously you're creating these beautiful images on each page. Often when you see children's books, the images are merely illustrations of what's in the text. I feel like there's kind of, in you guys' book, there's two kind of narrative threads that are working together. So there's the textual story, and then there are all these other things that are, there we go, there's an image there. Yeah. There's almost a story that's also kind of it's like a harmonizing that's happening in the images as well. So yeah, I guess you've already kind of talked about this desire to bring in those texts, but I thought there's a great scene where you see the opening of eyes and of ears and of healing being illustrated, and it's not explicitly in Sarah's story text, but you're kind of, this is the promise of the one who's coming.
Yeah. I mean, well, that was actually one of the harder pages to actually draw, because it's like, how do you explicitly draw these things as an idea? Because it's not like it's like a thing that has happened. So they're like guessing this thing. So I'm like, and I think it just ended up with this, like, they're talking about it. So the speech is like the bubble of all that stuff, and especially of Isaiah 61. It's just like, that's such a rich text. And so, yeah, I think that was actually quite a challenging page for me, because the other ones are like pretty straightforward, and I can push a little bit on other parts, but yeah, like it's like an explanation of what's going on. And there was a lot of back and forth on that one.
I feel like we're all familiar with the beats of the Nativity. We've all seen Nativity plays and whatever, we can talk about the way that they truncate the story, but we're all aware of the narrative beats. And I felt like what was good about the way you guys handled it was, obviously we have those narrative elements from the birth narratives in the Gospels, but it felt like the focus was really on the person and the promise of Jesus rather than just the telling of the narrative, which is great.
Yeah, I think something that's been really cool for us is, because the book's been out for the past couple months, one of our friends, our daughter's friends' mom, they're not believers. They're open. We've been just friending folks at our daughter's school, and our friend gave the book to her mom because she had already ordered a copy, and she's like, "Oh, could I give this book that you've just given me to my mother?" And again, she's not from a faith background, and she reads it and then she just bursts into tears. Like, she's not. So I think the important thing is she's not a believer. And so I think for us, we're like, we really want to capture this sense of hope and God's presence and somehow communicate it in a way that doesn't compromise right? Or water down what's being promised, but still make it accessible. So we've been really surprised that both Christians and non-Christians, when they read the book, that they burst into tears. Like, these are adults. The kids are like, cool pictures. Like, what's this about? There's not really a lot of like a tears going on. It's very fun for them. But for the adults, there's kind of this layer of it tugs at something about hope. And that, I think, for us, when we think about Advent, it's really about hope, right? Like God's presence with us in the waiting.
Yeah.
That just as Israel's waiting in its bondage and its yearning for a savior, that we're also like waiting for God to fully like deliver. Right? He's given us a son, right? He's given us a chance for life with him, but we're also waiting for like all the evil and sin to end. And so it's been very fascinating for me to see the reactions to the book and to hear that note of hope is something that people just keep latching onto. Yeah. So
also this other thing, like it was before the book was published, I had shown the book, or like the concept of the, like, I guess like illustrations of the book on my iPad to is a Hebrew scholar.
Oh yeah. And I'm not sure exactly his faith background. He's probably, he might be deist, he might be agnostic,
or maybe evangelical or something. Yeah. But anywho, he's like a Hebrew scholar. He like teaches Hebrew and all this stuff, and it was so funny. He saw the first page and then he went to the last page, and he just was like, he was on the verge of tears. He was like, "This is such an honoring of the Jewish culture. This is such a like the oral tradition," and I was just like, yes, I know that about that. I didn't realize it was going to be such a heartfelt, emotional thing for him to be like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing!" And he was like, and I didn't even finish the last page. It was like kind of in a rough sketch form, but he just loved it so much that it surprised me, and I was like, maybe I need to expect more of a response like this by others. And I think honestly, like more and more people who just talk about the book is just like, they're like, we love this book, it's amazing. And there's more tears sometimes I'm like, really? Okay, cool.
I read out one page. It was like 3 sentences to my class at WTC because they were doing like this spoof video. Mm-hmm. And then I found myself like getting like choked up, and I was like, "This is what's going on, Sarah." But I do think there's something really beautiful, right, about the church's yearly rhythm of like remembering this story, remembering God coming to be with us, and we don't live in times that are very like optimistic, right? There's a lot of crises happening like nationally, internationally. And so I do think it's really important that when we are inviting people to remember faith, to explore faith, that aspect of hope of God's past, current, and future action is just really part of how we're sharing what it means to have hope in Jesus.
Yeah. I got that sense as I was reading through it, and I think it really taps into the longing that we all have for things to be made right, and for those of us who are people of faith, the promise that we sense in Jesus and the way that we see that at work in the world in ways, but still the longing that each of us has to see him, and the weight that we're all in for his return. I felt that really spoke to that as well, and so it's not just a capsule of the Christmas story, but speaks to our present moment. And I wanted to maybe pivot a little bit and ask you guys about, I have kids of my own. They're teenagers now. Oh my goodness, can't believe it. They're teenagers. But I've been involved in kids ministry in our church, and still involved in kids ministry in our church on Sunday mornings. And I'm always grateful for the people who do write resources for children. But quite often what I find is that those resources major, as we've spoken on kind of narrative elements of a story, and sometimes miss the actual point. Sometimes actually end up being kind of diametrically opposed to the actual point of the scripture and the way that they present a story. But I can only imagine that writing a book for children, you're constantly navigating that tension between making it accessible and embedding truth in what you're writing. So how do you do that?
I think for me, part of it is that this was the kind of work I did for adults when I worked for university. Like I was overseeing evangelism, and we were training Christian like young adults on how do you share the gospel in a way that avoids the Christianese, that connects to the real life of their friends. We're thinking about how do you make the gospel not dumbed down, but understood in different contexts, different cultural, like ethnic contexts and certain times. And so I've had to do that for like 15 years, right? And I remember my seminary professor, New Testament scholar, saying something to us. He was like, if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you don't understand it. And I'm not sure entirely if you can say that to everything, like I'm like Trinity, for example, tricky, but you could try, right? It's good. But yeah, and so I think by the time we're attempting this, for us, when we're reading, for me, when I'm reading to our daughter and I'm reading children's books about faith, I'm editing constantly because at this point,
Yeah.
she doesn't know how to read yet. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna change that phrase. I'm not gonna say which books, to make it a little more theologically sound, a little more biblically accurate, maybe more accessible. And so I was just doing that since she was like really young, and yeah, so I think that was just part of the practice for me because we really wanted to make faith understandable, but not because we dumb it down, but because we figure out how to help her understand what's going in her like 3-year-old brain or her 5-year-old brain. A really challenging conversation we had with the spouse of an Old Testament scholar in St. Andrews that runs a children's ministry at our church. And this really like messed with us because we were like, oh my gosh. And she was like, I never tell the kids that God will keep them safe. And I was like, because she's like, I tell them that God will be with them. He will walk with them in the valley. He will be with them in hard times. Like that he will be a shelter in the storm. But she's like, but if something happens to them or their family, someone dies, someone gets hurt, it's like, and she's like, and then they'll look at you and say, you lied to me. God did not keep me safe. She was basically like, I don't want to give them false building blocks. And that really, and she's like the nicest lady, I was like, I did not expect her to like, like really like, but I was like, it was a really strong argument. So I was like, what are the building blocks we're giving to our children? And I'm like, I do not want my daughter to think that following faith is downloading abstract truths that you can just
Yeah.
parrot,
Yeah.
I think Shin actually has some cool stories from doing children's ministry in a vineyard setting, about prayer.
Yeah. So one of the things that I always enjoyed doing, I know it was I taught P1 and it was this group, and was so long ago. Now they're all in like they're almost graduating high school, which is just
Wow.
insane. But anywho, these kids, I would always ask them before, like in the beginning of class, like, oh, is there anyone that you want to pray for right now? Or is there anything that you want to do, like the Lord wants to do, right? And so we're just asking. They're all raising their hands and all this stuff. And one girl, she raises her hand. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? And she's like, oh yeah, my dad, he hurt his foot on a mission trip. He's here, and like, can we pray for his ankle? And I was like, oh yeah, like let's do it, right? It's like we're doing a class trip, guys, and this is during service, right? And they're like, oh my god, and they all like get up and they're all really excited, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, and we're gonna pray for Chris's foot, and we're like, okay. And so they all like get really excited, and we line up, we file into the church, and the service literally completely stops. Like my friend Josh is like, what is going on? And like this like horde of little children come around my friend's foot, and they're just like praying for his foot, and they saw healing. Like he got healed that moment by like 12 little children praying for. And like my friend Josh was like, I don't need to preach. Like we're just going to do what they're like. Does anyone have any injuries? Like, can we pray? And those kids have not forgotten that memory.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
That they too could like do the thing that adults can do. Yeah. That it's not limited to only their life, like to like, oh, only if I'm like in high school or this, or I'm an adult, like that's when it really happens. Like it can happen from the moment the kid's born, right?
Yeah. Sure. I think I love that story, and I think really think about how do we invite little children to participate in life of faith, and how do they even challenge us? Like I just want to be a parent and a teacher that's constantly open to that. And I do think like deciding to identify Jesus as like the deliverer. Uh, I think it helps us think about, yes, we do pray, right? God, like deliver me from situations, like would you keep me safe from harm? But it is that we trust in a God that when hard things happen, He delivers us, right? He leads us to shelter, He leads us to water, He leads us, and like I would hope that our kid and any child or person that reads this book gets to have life with a living God that delivers us from evil, that delivers us to greener pastures, and that it's that active element of faith that I really hope that our daughter learns, and that readers of this book really learn as they're growing in faith.
Many of us have had the experience of being reaching adulthood and reading stories like Jonah or other different things and realizing, hang on a minute, this is not what I was taught when I was a kid. And God bless all of our kids leaders and teachers and the work that they've put in. But I do think there's something about if we want to give kids a sustainable faith in the long term, that they need to be taught the truth. And I wonder if sometimes we don't give kids or the Holy Spirit enough credit for being able to present things as they are.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's true. I mean, I love hearing about how different parents and caregivers like they invest in the spiritual formation and prayer of their kids. Like our close friends, when they like pray, they pray with their 7-year-old and 4-year-old. They're like, okay, let's catch something from Jesus. They're like praying, and their kids hear stuff. It's always like crazy prophetic. I think with our daughter right now, she's not really at a point where she's like would readily respond. Like maybe once in 6 months, she'll have a profound sort of thing where I'm like, that's definitely not from you. But for the most part, but she still wants to learn. The irony is, I wrote my thesis on the atonement, right? What does the death and sacrifice of Christ, and resurrection mean for our faith? She asks me every day, why did Jesus die on a cross? Like every day since she's like she's 6, right? She's asked me that like every day, every other day for the past year. And but I think for me, something that I think about is I'm like, it makes sense that this doesn't make sense to her, because right, she's like, God is loving, He loves us so much. Why does someone need to die? Why does there need to be death or sacrifice? And that's part of the mystery of faith, right? That we believe
Yeah.
that there's something about the death of Christ that actually brings to us like salvation. That's good news. But the mathematics, the logics of that, and like her 5-year-old brain asks every other day. And and one day I was like, oh, so why do you think Jesus died on a cross? Or they threw it back to her. She's like, because the soldiers killed him. And I was like, yes, that is also part of it. But I think for me, I'm like, the fact that she asks me every day shows me that she's wrestling with actually a very difficult part of faith, that grown-ups sometimes reject Christianity because they're like, I can't believe that. That's like too much. And
Yeah.
I see that as her really wrestling and persevering in her 6-year-old mind and wanting to understand the scriptures. So for me, I'm like, anytime she asks a question about the Bible, I'm like, there's no such thing, right, as a dumb question. I just want her to keep wanting to learn and trusting that, the Holy Spirit's like leading her and speaking to her as she prays, as she asks questions. That's my hope. On the best days, I embody it. On the worst days, I'm like, oh, Lord, redeem this past day. Give me a chance anew.
Yeah. I think sometimes people think that theology is attaining the ability to speak about God in some kind of lofty plane where mere mortals can never ascend to those linguistic ideological heights, But I love what you guys said earlier about actually good theology gives us the tools with which to present things clearly to people. And I think about people who are involved in kids' work and that actually having a good theological understanding is important because they are laying the foundation for people for years to come. And could we imagine what the future of the church would be with kids workers who are equipped in that way, to take the time. And it's not just about giving pat answers or, here, I can answer all of your difficult questions. I mean, I've had some stonkers of questions from kids in our preschool in my church. It's just like, this would take a lot longer than 30 seconds to explain this to you. But to be able to partner with kids on that journey as they're asking those questions, and not just giving them the pat answers, but honoring and respecting the questions that they're bringing and having those conversations.
Yeah. I hope for that too. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I really would recommend people to pick up a copy of the book The Deliverer Has Come, and we'll post links in the show notes to check out Shin's work and Sarah's other work that she's done as well. And I'm really grateful for the time and the effort that you guys have put into this, and I think it will be a great way for parents and families, both kids and adults, to engage in this conversation about the person of Jesus and what he has brought by coming into this world. So just want to thank you guys for that.
Oh yeah, no, thanks so much. Yeah, it was super fun.
Thanks for having us.
No problems. Speak soon. Thank you, guys.
Okay, all right.